in our first discussion, one of the items that we think is particularly important bibliographically is this volume of newsprints from Salisbury Mills in Massachusetts that include a number of John Greenleaf Whittier poems and a number of other interesting pieces. In our initial investigation of the piece, we found that there weren't any recorded holdings at Harvard or Yale or any of the normal instances. So Anatomy put together a basic catalog description of what's entailed in the book.
So there are three different newspapers included in this bound volume. Mm-hmm. There's a Salisbury Monitor, the Salisbury Daily Monitor, and the Reservoir of Science.
Okay. And when it was published between
1837 and 1838.
Okay. We did find that a 19th century publication about newsprints in Salisbury just speaks of the same publisher, Caldwell, and makes note of a publication he ran in 1837 and then another one in 1839, but there's this gap right where these three papers would be isn't recorded in this 19th century publication. We decided, as we said, to send this description to a number of librarians and scholars, none of which had heard of the three publications as far as they were aware. Finally, we got in touch with Vincent Golden, who is curator of newspapers at the American Antiquarian Society, and he was very kind enough to follow up with us and ascertain that the publications are not listed in any of the references he's aware of. The only reference he could find was for the Liberator publication in Boston, quoting an article in the Salisbury Monitor on anti-dueling, but there being no other recorded holdings. So it's very unusual for us to find a book that we're cataloging hasn't been recorded in some fashion. What's interesting about this group, and is quite exciting I think, is that it's not just some variant on a known entity. These are three fully constituted publications that are completely unknown in the historical or bibliographical literature. It's really quite an unusual thing to find, especially when we know it has some very significant literary content. John Greenleaf Whittier, who is obviously one of the most important abolitionist poets of the 19th century, was blessed to have a very important bibliographer, Matthew Franklin Currier, who was librarian at Harvard in the 30s, produced an absolutely comprehensive bibliography of all the printings of Whittier's writings that ever appeared up to that point. Many bibliographers engage in publications of just the most minute, overlooked reprint in an English publication of a Whittier poem that hadn't been in Currier as part of their bread and butter. So the fact that this entire group of publications is not in Currier and happens to have not one variant or two variants, but 6 complete poems by Whittier. No library had copies of these publications until we discovered them through this process. So it's quite an exciting bibliographical find. And then I think the final thing that's really exciting is that it's not just ephemeral newspapers, but it actually contains some very significant literary content. Apart from the poems by Whittier himself, these publications are not like newspapers today. They're very similar to the Franklin almanacs. They're full of opinion and commentary about politics and events around the period. But the most exciting part of it is that we've discovered that at least the Salisbury Monitor is edited by M.F. Whittier, which we understand is Matthew Franklin Whittier, or John Greenleaf Whittier's brother. Well, here we have, quite astonishingly, Matthew Franklin Whittier as the editor-in-chief at the age of 26 in their hometown and publishing this vast array of opinion and poetry and other pieces. We also found, quite interestingly, that there are a number of original poems in here that were written exclusively for the Monitor and appearing apparently in no other publication. One of the most interesting ones we discovered is entitled The Slave, and is again an anti-abolitionist poem dealing with a rebellion in the island of Guadeloupe. Now, quite interesting, we discovered through our biographical research, Matthew Franklin Whittier had just married a young woman from Guadeloupe prior to these publications. But it's quite likely from that just circumstantial evidence that he is almost certainly the author of this original poem of abolitionist subject matter. Suddenly, we find that there's this potentially important literary content, and it's constant in the publications that's simply unrecorded. So we feel that, what this does, it certainly opens up a window into the relationship of the two Whittiers, a whole rich original content that hasn't been recorded in any institutional holdings, but potentially has the possibility of creating a renaissance around Whittier and his writings at the time that these publications appeared. All right, so we're also following up on our research and cataloging on this map of Mexico and California by Mitchell. And the issue was, although it had sold at another auction house, there was an identification of the issue and the edition. And so, Adam, we were going to do some research on this. Where are we on that score?
Well, I think I have it now.
Okay.
So I think, as we discussed before, it's a transitional map.
Mm-hmm.
It was really following the Mexican-American War,
Mm-hmm.
and Mitchell was adding information as he went.
Mm-hmm.
So I eventually found a map
Mm-hmm.
identical, same town listings in the Rumsey collection. In the Rumsey collection, they consider it the first 1847 issue. As I proceeded to do more research,
Mm-hmm.
I found there was an earlier 1847 issue in the auction records. So that issue has, instead of Fort Townsend,
Mm-hmm.
it has just the fort.
Mm-hmm.
There's a number of Mexican towns not on that earlier 1847 issue. So we have pinned this down now to the second 1847 issue.
Well, none of the towns in Baja California, or what they call Old California, are recorded other than Loreto in the 1846 edition. Here, they've added La Paz, Mulegé, San Miguel, etc. So as more information became available to Mitchell, he started to add towns and details to this map from the original plate. That's fantastic. Again, it shows the history of cartography at the time. There is a copy of this map that was published in 1846, and so it's quite possible that the original first edition of this map does in fact predate the map of Texas, Oregon, and California that is accurate and shows Mitchell's discovery of Fremont's information. One of the other curiosities, as you said, is that it got to the point where they even added the town of Yerba Buena on the coast of the Bay Area in where is today Oakland. And of course, Yerba Buena was the original name of San Francisco. So they put inaccurate information in the final and third edition in their zeal to add more and more details and more information. And so a map like this and the various stages of it does show both the accuracy and inaccuracy of knowledge at the time and the process of changing the maps from period to period. And certainly from our purposes, it is extremely important to try and pin down exactly which edition and which issue you're dealing with for historical accuracy. Very interesting. That's fascinating.